Our manuscript of the Poetic Edda, referred to usually as Codex Regius or Koningsbok, the King's Book, is missing some pages. And this factoid must be getting around somewhere on the internet right now because I've been seeing a fair amount of weird speculation about it, including notions that it must contain some deep secret lore about the gods or maybe about worshiping the gods, something that someone who is a Christian might be perhaps especially interested in suppressing. But the fact is, the part of the manuscript that's missing, the place that it's missing from tells us what's missing, if not, the exact words of it. We know the context, we know what part of what story this is, and it is part of the story of the Volsung heroes. So let's take a look at what might be in that missing piece. So first of all, if we take a modern book, like say my translation of the Poetic Edda, or what I actually have on me right now, my Wanderer's Journal, the way that we number pages, say this is the first page, to us, that's page 1, and then that's page 2, right? But when we talk about medieval manuscripts, this is sheet 1, and this is 1V, 1R, 1 recto, and this is 1V, 1 verso. So what's missing from the Poetic Edda is 8 sheets, okay, or 16 pages from our modern perspective. And they are missing between the pages that are numbered 32V and 33R. Now, this numbering system is not the medieval one. We don't really know how they would have paginated things. This is a modern convention. But this particular numbering for this manuscript and most other Old Norse manuscripts was assigned in the modern period by modern scholars. And so these page numbers are given once the 8 sheets have already been ripped out. Now, this manuscript, GKS 2365 Cordo, was discovered by Brynjolfur Sveinsson in 1643, and it was already missing these pages then. So since the manuscript was produced in 1270, that tells you that somewhere between 1270 and 1643, these pages were ripped out. And it's probably actually toward the end of that period because a copy was made of the first poem that is missing pages, Sigurdrifumal, somewhere around 1600, that actually does have the entire text. So somebody did have the entirety of Sigurdrifumal and apparently had it from the Codex Regius because the text of the parts that are there in the Codex Regius is the same in that copy, or the copies of that copy. So where does this gap in the manuscript occur? It starts, we start missing pages right in the middle of Sigurdrifumal. This is the poem where the Valkyrie Sigurdriva, who may be the same person as Brynhildr, the author of the Saga of the Volsungs, understands her as such, although she may not originally have been intended to be the same person. She is giving advice to the hero Sigurdur. And then when we pick up after the lacuna, the missing pages, we are in what scholars today call Brot of Sigurdarkviðu, the fragment of a poem about Sigurd, and the reason it's called that is because it's just a fragment. Probably most of the pages that are missing are from that poem about Sigurdur, because again, we do have the complete Sigurdrifumal from a copy made when the poem was still complete around 1600. We have a lot of quotations from a poem that we don't otherwise know about Sigurdur that's in the Saga of the Volsungs, so that tells you that the author of the Saga of the Volsungs does know this poem. Most likely it's this poem that's missing, either in a written or an oral form, and is quoting from it there. And the other poem that covers roughly the same part of Sigurdur's life in the Poetic Edda is called Sigurdarkviða in Skama, the short poem about Sigurdur, which tells you that the one that we call the fragment was probably the bigger one, right? especially since the so-called short poem about Sigurd is actually one of the longest poems in the Poetic Edda. So in context, we are missing, the end of Sigurdriva the Valkyrie talking to Sigurd, and again, happily, that was copied around 1600, so we do know how the rest of that goes. So basically what we're missing is how does Sigurd die according to the longer poem about Sigurd. And probably we're getting that anyway from the saga of the Volsungs being written by someone who does know that entire story, does know that entire poem, and thus paraphrases and quotes it. The reason that I think that that's what is in those missing pages and not some deep dark lore about Odin or Loki or about, being pagan or something, is that the Codex Regius manuscript is pretty organized, right? It starts with Völuspá, so we get the beginning and the end of the world. Then we get a poem about Odin, Hávamál, then some more poems about him, Vathur the Small, Grím the Small, a poem about Freyr, Forskirnis, a bunch of poems about Thor, poems about elves and dwarves, and then poems about the human heroes, Helgi and the Volsung heroes in basically chronological order. So it would be really weird if the editor, who had, clearly a plan for what order to write these poems out in, had, suddenly switched subject in the middle of basically the account of the life of the hero Sigurd. So that's certainly what's missing there. And while that's too bad, I would remind people that mourn this that probably the reason that it was torn out, my guess is that somebody was a Sigurd stan, right? And actually really liked this part or something. This is probably somebody saying, oh, who cares about this old dusty manuscript? Nobody's going to notice if I take this from whoever owned this before Brynjolfur Sveinsson. We actually don't know who that was. And, this was their, I don't know, bedtime reading or something. So it's not likely to have contained secrets that people on the internet would be interested in today, but it would certainly have contained poetry that scholars would have been intrigued to read. And any of you who like the Volsung story probably will regret that missing part of it from the poem, because obviously the author of the saga of the Volsungs, if you read that and compare it to the poems that are in the Poetic Edda about the Volsungs, you can tell the saga writer really smooths over a lot of the story, and that there's a lot of raw, more archaic material in those poems that we would have liked to have seen that raw or more archaic form of. So we're lucky to have what we have, but we don't have that. Now, this has fired the imagination of some people in the modern period. For example, J.R.R. Tolkien actually wrote his version of the missing complete poem about Sigurd and Gudrun, and that's his book that's called The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. Often misrepresented in modern media by people who don't know what Tolkien was doing or anything about the Old Norse text as like a lost Norse saga by Tolkien or something like that. I mean, it's not a saga because it's a poem. Sagas are prose. It's not lost in the sense that we do roughly, in broad strokes, know what happens to Sigurd and Gudrun and in the story. But anyway, Tolkien, of course, couldn't let that mystery pass without making his own version, so you can check that out if you like. And of course, if you want to read the poems of the Poetic Edda in a revised translation that accounts for 10 new years of learning about and deeply studying these poems, you can check out my second edition of the Poetic Edda. You can also check out my translation of the Saga of the Volsungs, that prose source that turns all those poems into one cohesive story in the 1200s, kind of a more novelistic story. And of course, thank you to those who already are getting those books, and thank you to those supporting this channel on Patreon. And from my old backyard, believe that or not, I'm wishing you all the best.